What if the biggest threat to your success isn't failure, but success itself? Imagine building something that works so well that you become comfortable with it, while the world around you quietly change. That's exactly what happened to Nokia. And this isn't just a story about how a phone company collapsed. It's a story about how small decisions can create a domino effect, where one missed opportunity leads to another, until changing becomes almost impossible. As we follow Nokia's rise and fall, you'll see the warning signs that appeared long before the collapse. So, before we get to the phones, smartphones, and the downfall, let's go back to where Nokia began, because surprisingly, it didn't begin with technology. It began with paper. In 1865, a mining engineer named Frederick Idestam built a small pulp mill on the Tamerkoski Rapids in Finland. He'd learned a cheaper paper-making method in Germany, and Finland had everything he needed: forests, water, and rivers strong enough to power machinery. A few years later, he built a second mill on the Nokianverta River near a town called Nokia and named his company after it. Nokia AB was incorporated in 1871. At this point, there was nothing technological about it. It was a paper company next to a river. But that river was about to matter more than anyone could have guessed, because in 1902, Nokia used it to start generating electricity. Paper had led to power, and power was about to lead somewhere nobody would have predicted. Two other companies were growing in the same small town, for reasons that seemed unrelated at the time. In 1898, Edward Poland founded Finnish Rubber Works, making rubber boots and tires. In 1912, Finnish Cable Works appeared, producing telegraph wires and telephone cables. 3 companies, 3 industries. No obvious connection, except one. They all depended on the same town, the same workers, and the same electricity that Nokia's river was generating. That shared thread mattered more than anyone realized. In 1918, Finnish Rubber Works acquired Nokia AB, partly for its hydroelectric power. In 1922, Finnish Cable Works joined them. It still took until 1967 for the 3 to formally merge into one company, Nokia Corporation, a sprawling conglomerate making everything from tires to televisions to military communications gear. That question, when a company can do everything, what should it actually become, would define Nokia's next 50 years. Because buried inside this strange pile of businesses was something far more valuable than paper or rubber. A cable division that, in the 1960s, started experimenting with radio transmission for the Finnish military. Finland is vast and sparsely populated, and for the military, transport workers, and emergency services scattered across it, wireless communication wasn't a luxury. It solved a real problem. Motorola and Ericsson were already chasing the same opportunity with a massive head start. So why would a Finnish paper and rubber company think it could compete? Because Nokia wasn't trying to win a market that already existed. It was starting to notice the one that didn't exist yet, and it had one underrated advantage: decades of practice taking a capability from one industry and applying it to the next. Paper led to power, power led to industry. Industry led to cables, cables led to communication. One domino pushed the next. In 1982, Nokia released the Mobira Senator, an early car phone that weighed almost 10 kilograms. Bulky, expensive, impractical, but proof the idea could work outside a lab. Then in 1991, Finland's prime minister made the world's first official GSM call on Nokia equipment. GSM was becoming Europe's new digital standard, and Nokia had spent years positioned right at the center of it. Most people had no idea how important this would become. Nokia did, and that set up one of the most important decisions in the company's history. In 1992, Jorma Ollila became Nokia's CEO, inheriting a company in real trouble. The Soviet Union had just collapsed, taking a major trading partner with it. Finland was in a banking crisis, unemployment was near 17%, and Nokia itself was losing money. Ollila looked at the sprawling empire in front of him: paper mills, rubber factories, tire plants, televisions, and made a call that sounded reckless. Nokia couldn't afford to be everything anymore. So it would become one thing: telecommunications. Everything else gone. Imagine that decision in your own life. Imagine spending decades building 5 different income streams or 5 different skills, and someone tells you the future depends on burning 4 of them down and betting everything on the fifth. That's what Alala did. If mobile phones failed, there was no other business left to catch Nokia's fall. He was walking into a market where Motorola and Ericsson were already giants. But Nokia had noticed something they'd underestimated. The mobile phone didn't have to stay a luxury item for executives and soldiers. It could become something ordinary people used every day. Nokia didn't need to build the most advanced phone in the world. It needed to make mobile communication simpler, cheaper, and more reliable than anyone else. Sometimes the biggest opportunity isn't inventing something new. It's making something that already exists actually usable by millions of people. Simpler phones meant more people could use them. Cheaper meant more people could afford them. Smaller meant more people carried them everywhere. Reliable meant people trusted the brand. And trust, at scale, becomes a habit. Under Alala, Nokia released phone after phone. Cheaper, smaller, more reliable than the last, with clean designs and a reputation for being nearly indestructible. They worked in Helsinki, and they worked just as well in Nairobi and Mumbai, where reliable technology couldn't be taken for granted. Nokia wasn't selling people a computer to impress their friends. It was selling them something they could depend on. By 1998, Nokia passed Motorola to become the world's largest phone maker, a 6-year turnaround for a company that used to make rubber boots. Then, in September 2000, came the phone that would define the brand forever, the Nokia 3310. No camera, no internet, no touch screen, a monochrome screen, and a battery that lasted days and a body that seemed to shrug off concrete. It didn't try to do everything. It did the important things extremely well. Add Snake 2, and a phone became a cultural phenomenon, one that people didn't market for Nokia because they marketed it to each other. And Nokia's real genius was refusing to stop at wealthy markets. In 2003, it released the Nokia 1100 stripped down, ultra cheap, and built with a feature that sounds almost silly today, a flashlight. In parts of rural India and sub-Saharan Africa, where street lighting couldn't be assumed, that flashlight was the difference between designing for a market and designing for a person. The 1100 sold more than 250 million units, one of the best-selling phones ever made. Nokia didn't win by making technology complicated. It won by making it accessible. By 2004, Nokia was releasing 36 different phone models a year, covering nearly every price point on Earth. Cheap phones for Lagos, rugged phones for Sao Paulo, multimedia phones for London teenagers, business phones for New York executives. And in 1994, the Nokia 2100 series had introduced a ringtone based on a 19th century guitar piece called Grand Vals. The Nokia tune would eventually be heard billions of times a day, a company that hadn't just put phones in people's hands, but put itself into their daily lives. Between 1996 and 2001, Nokia's revenue exploded from roughly $6.5 billion to more than $31 billion. By 2007, it topped $50 billion, with 435 million handsets sold that year alone, close to 40% of the global market, peaking near 50%. In 2005, Nokia sold its billionth phone. Its market cap approached 110 billion euros in 2007, against a Finnish GDP of roughly 186 billion euros that same year. A company born from a paper mill was now worth more than half the annual economic output of the country where it began. This was Nokia at the summit. And when you're standing at the top of a mountain, the hardest thing to imagine is falling. While Nokia was making the phone smaller, cheaper, and more capable, another company was looking at the same device and asking a completely different question. What if the phone didn't need buttons at all? On January 9, 2007, Steve Jobs walked on stage and introduced the iPhone, a widescreen iPod, a revolutionary phone, and a breakthrough internet device, all in one. The audience erupted. Inside Nokia's headquarters in Espoo, the reaction was far quieter. CEO Olli-Pekka Kalasvuo wasn't worried, and by the numbers, he had reasons not to be. No physical keyboard, a weak camera, poor battery life, no MMS at launch, available through one carrier in one country. while Nokia was still selling hundreds of millions of phones a year. Why would a company at the top panic over a device with almost no market share? That's the comfort trap. And the dangerous thing about it is that it never feels like a mistake from the inside. It feels like common sense. Nokia's own N95, also released in 2007, was in many ways more capable on paper. 5-megapixel camera, GPS, Wi-Fi, expandable storage. But here's where the first domino actually fell. Nokia was optimizing the phone. Apple was redefining the experience. Nokia was asking, how many features can we add? Apple was asking, how should this feel to use? Those are different questions, and the second one was about to matter a lot more than the first. Behind the iPhone's touchscreen was something even bigger, an ecosystem. iTunes and soon the App Store, a world where developers built software and the phone got more valuable over time just by existing. The phone was becoming a platform. Nokia saw the iPhone. It didn't fully see what it represented. And here's the part that makes it worse. Nokia's own engineers had prototyped touchscreens years before the iPhone existed. This wasn't a failure of innovation. It was a failure of will, an unwillingness to destroy something that was still working. Sometimes the hardest company to disrupt is your own. Nokia had billions tied up in its existing phone business, millions of customers on its existing software, and an operating system, Symbian, that had powered hundreds of millions of devices. For years, that had been a massive advantage. By the smartphone era, it had quietly become a liability. Symbian was built for small screens and physical keypads. Turning it into a modern touchscreen OS was like trying to turn a bicycle into an airplane by bolting on more parts. Nokia's engineers knew this. Some push for Android, which Google had just open-sourced. But the installed base that made Symbian valuable was the same thing that made abandoning it terrifying. Every successful phone Nokia shipped made the case for keeping Symbian a little stronger, and every year of delay made the eventual cost of switching a little higher. Management dismissed the warnings. Symbian was familiar. Symbian was cheap. Symbian already had share. Why fix what wasn't broken? Except it was, and it was getting worse. One Nokia employee reportedly joked that Chinese manufacturers could design, build, and ship a whole phone in the time it took Nokia to polish a PowerPoint slide about one. Funny joke, not a funny problem. Bureaucracy had become a competitive disadvantage, and fear had started spreading through the company. Employees protecting their careers instead of raising alarms. Call it the silence effect. When people are afraid to tell leadership something is wrong, leadership becomes the last to know how bad it really is. Then, in late 2007, Google announced Android and the Open Handset Alliance. Samsung, HTC, LG, and dozens of others jumped on. Nokia was suddenly being squeezed from two directions at once. Apple from above, with a premium ecosystem, Android from below, with a flexible platform anyone could adapt. And its own operating system couldn't keep pace with either one. By 2010, Nokia's smartphone share had slipped from roughly 50% to 30% and was still falling. A company can look enormous and still be sinking, like a ship that keeps moving forward on momentum even after the captain has already turned the wheel. The problem wasn't Nokia's speed. It was Nokia's direction. In September 2010, Nokia's board brought in Stephen Alop, a former Microsoft executive, the first non-Finnish CEO in the company's 145-year history. He inherited enormous resources, a legendary brand, and an organization that was struggling to keep up with a market moving faster than it could. On February 8, 2011, Alop sent employees a roughly 13,000-word internal memo. It leaked almost immediately and became one of the most infamous documents in tech history, the one we opened with. A man on a burning platform. Jump or burn. Nokia, he wrote, our platform is burning. He was right about the diagnosis. But being right about the problem doesn't guarantee you make the right decision next. And sometimes the most dangerous moment isn't realizing you're wrong. It's rushing to fix everything the moment after. 3 days after the memo leaked, Alop announced Nokia's answer. Symbian would be abandoned. MeeGo, the Linux-based successor Nokia had been quietly developing, would be abandoned too. Instead, Nokia would build its future on Microsoft's Windows Phone. On paper, it had logic. Nokia had hardware expertise. Microsoft had software expertise. But the strategy overlooked something crucial: perception. The moment Nokia told the world Symbian was dead, it gave millions of customers a reason not to buy the Symbian phone still on shelves. Announce the old product is dying, and customers hesitate, sales fall, developers lose confidence, the platform dies even faster than it would have on its own. It was a restaurant announcing it's closing the kitchen next month before the new one is built. And Nokia's own alternative was sitting right there. The MeeGo-powered N9 launched in 2011 to real critical praise. Proof Nokia could still build something genuinely great. It became a symbol of the road not taken. Sometimes a company has the right technology inside its own walls and chooses a different door anyway. Nokia's Windows Phone devices, branded Lumia, got good reviews too. The hardware was still world-class. But hardware wasn't the problem. Apps were. Developers weren't building for Windows Phone at anywhere near the scale of iOS or Android, and customers no longer just wanted a beautiful phone. They wanted the world that came with it. Instagram, banking apps, maps, games. Windows Phone was stuck in a feedback loop moving the wrong way. Few apps, fewer users, fewer developers. During Alap's 3 years as CEO, Nokia's smartphone share collapsed from roughly 34% to 3.4%. Its credit rating was downgraded to junk. Its revenue and share price fell sharply. The company that had once shipped hundreds of millions of phones a year was now selling a fraction of that. The company everyone once wanted to copy had become the company everyone was trying to leave. A good decision made too late can become a bad decision. And a bad decision made in a crisis can accelerate the very collapse you're trying to stop. On September 3rd, 2013, it became official. Microsoft would acquire Nokia's devices and services business for 5.44 billion euros, about $7.2 billion. Around 32,000 Nokia employees transferred to Microsoft when the deal closed in April 2014. A company that once controlled nearly half the world's phone market was now selling the business that made it famous. Alap returned to Microsoft as an executive, his departure package reportedly drawing criticism from Finland's own prime minister. But if Nokia's sale was painful, Microsoft's outcome was worse. In 2015, it wrote down roughly $7.6 billion tied to the deal and laid off thousands, many of them former Nokia staff. By 2016, the feature phone assets and rights to the Nokia name had been sold again, to Foxconn and HMD Global for around $350 million. A business once worth something in the neighborhood of $99 billion had, in under a decade, been reduced to a few hundred million. More than 99% of the value gone. Was this collapse inevitable? Not necessarily. Nokia had the engineers, the patents, the manufacturing scale, the distribution, and one of the strongest brands on earth. What it struggled to do was something much harder than any of that: destroy part of its own successful business before someone else destroyed it for them. Some analysts still argue an earlier bet on Android might have changed everything. Nokia chose Windows Phone instead, for reasons that are still debated. Alap's Microsoft background, fear of becoming a commodity hardware maker for Google, financial incentives in the Microsoft deal. Whatever the real reason, the result was the same: a platform that couldn't build the ecosystem it needed. Nokia still held valuable assets: network infrastructure, mapping technology, an enormous patent portfolio. Instead of trying to rebuild the Nokia of the past, it rebuilt around what it still did well. In 2015, it acquired Alcatel-Lucent for roughly 15.6 billion euros, becoming a major telecommunications infrastructure company instead of a phone maker. For the first time in the smartphone era, Nokia did the thing it had struggled to do all along. It accepted that the old version of itself was gone and built toward the next one. Today, Nokia is a real player in telecom infrastructure, competing with Ericsson, Huawei, and Samsung. But the Nokia most people remember is largely gone. HMD Global, the Finnish company that licensed the Nokia name, started releasing Nokia-branded Android phones in 2017, and that same year, brought back the 3310 as a nostalgia product. Nobody bought it because it was the future. They bought it because it reminded them of the past. So what actually happened to Nokia? Not simply the iPhone beat them. Nokia's real enemy was more uncomfortable than that. Its own success. It didn't fail from a lack of talent, patents, money, or distribution. It failed because success made changing harder, because it became afraid to damage a business that was still making money. But there's a hopeful twist. When Nokia's phone business collapsed, the talent inside it didn't disappear, it scattered. Many of those engineers and product managers went on to build new companies, feeding a startup ecosystem in Finland that eventually produced companies like Supercell, Clash of Clans, and Rovio, Angry Birds. Losing one opportunity doesn't mean losing everything. Sometimes failure destroys the structure around your talent, but the talent itself survives. Nokia's story isn't really about a paper mill that became a phone company and collapsed. It's a story about transformation, over and over. Paper to power, power to industry, industry to cables, cables to phones, phones to infrastructure. The irony is that its biggest failure came the one time it couldn't transform fast enough. Don't wait for your burning platform to make the decision for you. Build the next one while you're still standing on this one.